Hello and welcome to our second town hall in our faculty forum series hosted by the Music Therapy Faculty Forum Steering Committee. I'm Andrew Knight, an associate professor of music therapy at Colorado State University, and along with Vicky Vega at Loyola University, we co-chair the steering committee, a group of 7 educators looking to host these forums to support music therapy educators and provide a space for important conversations around music therapy education. We believe these are ongoing discussions, and in these town halls, we will do our best to try to have a wide variety of ideas and voices on an equally wide variety of topics. The Faculty Forum Steering Committee is also seeking nominations to the committee for the remainder of the 2020 to 2022 term. We invite you to submit nominations, including self-nominations, to serve on the steering committee. Full and part-time faculty who teach in AMTA-approved academic programs are eligible, and we particularly welcome nominations of newer faculty and faculty of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. Nominations will be accepted starting tonight, September 22nd. Please send nominations to me at andrew.knight@colostate.edu. I'll put that in the chat, and Vicky Vega's email as well. Do that by October 15th, 6 p.m. Eastern. Nominations will be collated and then presented to all music therapy faculty for a vote by October 22nd, with a 2-week voting period to follow. Tonight, we're turning our attention to racial equity in music therapy education. This is just part 1, so save the same time and setting for October 6th, when we will have part 2 of this discussion. And now I'll turn it over to Natasha Thomas and Adenika Webb.
All right. Welcome, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so you can see the Prezi, hopefully, that we're going to be working from. And Adenike and I are going to sort of lead us in an opening grounding experience, which I just realized I will have to actually change my screen for this because I'm going to provide a little bit of backing for Adenike to do some singing. But I guess I can provide, if this is helpful, just why we're choosing to ground ourselves this way. I feel like that might be useful for folks. Conversations about racial equity are occasionally stressful. And we want to encourage reflexivity during this time. We want to encourage gentleness with yourself during this time. And the best way we could think of to set the tone for that was to do so with some music. So we're gonna move into this piece. The lyrics are, when I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the screen share and get my audio from Ableton shared properly, and then I'll pull the screen back up again. Going back and forth between Zoom and Ableton. Okay, here we go. Can we hear that all right? Cool, all right. I'm gonna go ahead and get the lyrics back up on the screen. Ooh, hello. Oops, here it is. Okay, and Adenike, when you're ready.
Sure. I will start singing, and I invite you, as you feel comfortable, to join in and just allow the music to help you settle, to prepare yourself to be open and joining with others in discussion tonight. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe out love. When I breathe in peace. When I breathe breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love.
All right. From here, I'm going to hand it over to our students that are joining us this evening, Grace Parlier and Naomi Davis. If you want to introduce yourselves and share some perspectives, yeah, we're handing it over to you next. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. Hi everyone, my name is Naomi Davis. I am a current music therapy intern and also serving as the president-elect for the AMTAS Student Board.
And I'm Grace Parlier. I am the current vice president of the AMTAS, the Student American Music Therapy Association Board as well. And I'm a junior at Alverno College.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about some conversations we've been having with students this past summer, kind of revolving around cultural education and racism that we see kind of presented in our schools and also in our own lives. We initially kind of started these conversations to just share resources about anti-racism and ways that we as students could be seeking to become actively anti-racist in our everyday lives and in our roles as students and future music therapists.
So yeah, initially we had started and we were going to do a series of just posting different resources on our social media accounts, but we realized in an AMTAS meeting that we needed to have these discussions to ensure that while there's not often malintent, there's just misinformation and a lack of openness and willingness among students and peers to discuss these issues of race and cultural intolerance and injustice in our world. So
these
called a series of these discussions, conversations around race and cultural education through the summer.
So these conversations we began having with just students in our own schools and in our own regions, but we realized that there was a hunger from students to have these conversations on a larger scope. And that's where we kind of developed this idea for bi-weekly meetings to continue to learn and grow with one another. And they were structured as conversations, not as classes or anything like that. It was just frank and open conversations with students that were focused on personal growth and everyday improvement. So we really structured them around having, resource sharing and then coming up with clear action steps of things we could be doing both on the personal end and within our universities to continue these conversations outside of just this summer. So one of the action steps that we gave for our personal growth when looking at repertoire and looking at the lack of diversity in the music that we use as music therapy students was just first taking a look at our own personal listening and the things that we listen to in our downtime and really examining if we are listening to diverse artists and songs in Spanish and in other languages for ourselves before even bringing those into potential clinical spaces. And then on a larger scale or within our schools, we talked about potentially writing a letter to your professors and asking them to examine the song list that they're passing out to students and the songs that are included in our repertoire lists to kind of negate the use of like minstrel songs and things like that, as well as include more continuing education resources within our classes and include race as more of a central paradigm in the conversations that we're having in our classrooms.
So these meetings consisted of preparing pre-meeting reading materials that we organized all on our website. So they're all for access for further use later on down the road. And then a series of target questions to evaluate the information you're either reading or listening to podcasts or watching videos on. So students would have about 3 pieces of material to digest, and then a space to immediately discuss it with their peers and have this interaction and this deliberation on how these articles and podcasts and videos relate so heavily to our practice and what we need to be providing as future therapists. So that was our main structure of it.
One thing that was really cool about a lot of these conversations is we had students, about 68 students kind of spread out across the country from over 21 different universities and really spread out all across the US. So we were able to really learn from each other and hear some of the things that we're learning regionally, as well as, from university to university, and also share some of the resources that are already present and some of the conversations that are already happening in a lot of our school programs. So that was a really great way for us to continue to learn that way and share information that way. And we had the pleasure of actually having Dr. Leonard join us as a guest speaker in one of our conversations. They were mostly student run and student attended, because we wanted to create kind of a safe space for those conversations to happen where students wouldn't feel judged or like they had to be impressive to any professionals that might be present in those spaces. So they were mostly students, but in this one meeting, we had Dr. Leonard come and discuss and answer questions around his most recent article, which was really great because we had over 53 students attend this presentation, and we really were able to hear a lot about some of the questions that students have right now about racial and cultural education within music therapy, or lack of in their different universities.
What was truly treasurable too was we had a lot of students that would regularly attend multiple meetings. So we got to create kind of this ever growing and circulating group of different opinions and voices and needs and questions. So we got to cultivate a nice community around these discussions. There were 5, we had 5 meetings in total. Our last one is this Saturday at 3:30. Allyship to diversifying repertoire, to conversation starters as to how we can best improve ourselves and work on being, as we said, actively anti-racist in our world.
One kind of central theme that we heard a lot in these conversations were things like fear of cultural appropriation and lack of diversity in curriculum content. And so we heard often questions about like, well, how do I use this genre and not be culturally appropriating? And so we really got to kind of dive into those conversations with each other and really talk about how it's not necessarily about like only using this kind of music in this kind of setting with these types of people with different backgrounds, but really going into the reasoning behind the hesitance to use certain genres within music therapy. And like reggae music, for instance, or rap, or even, songs in other languages. So we really kind of got the chance to just help each other through those conversations and navigating some of those thought processes, which was really great. I learned a lot from so many different students who are having these conversations on a regular basis with their professors and their peers as well. So.
Additionally, another pattern we noticed in a lot of these discussions was issues of access to the field and services in music therapy in general. This included the cost of being a music therapy major. Both being a music major in general is expensive, but with music therapy having to figure out how to do a 6-month internship unpaid, and conferences and AMTA membership, and really discussing kind of ways that some of our schools have addressed these issues of cost and access, and ways in which we think other schools or the field in general needs to improve as a whole. Additionally, we discussed issues of entrance in admittance to different programs with requirements of going within the Western classical tradition and the implications of having such limitations or expectations or traditions in teaching, and how it limits the product of music therapists that's coming out. Are we creating a culturally inclusive, a rich background of therapists to treat a rich background of clients, and how that will impact how I'm going to interact with my coworkers later on, and work with my clients on a day-to-day basis. So those were also great discussions that we got to really dive into as students.
Yeah. And then kind of to wrap this up a little bit, a couple of things that we really learned through this process is these are conversations that are really essential to our development as, future music therapists, no matter where we are, or music therapists, no matter where we are in that journey. And they're conversations that students are really craving engaging in. And so we really had the chance to share a lot of resources and target questions, not only in these conversations that we had, but also that students are kind of pledged to take with them into their university programs and find ways to interject them into conversations that may already be happening within the context of a class and outside of the context of a class.
And I think a final thing we gathered too was that a lot of the students that came to these meetings is that I learned so much with ideas on how to learn repertoire and other ways to look at how you're engaging with a cross-cultural therapeutic connection. And students have a lot of great ideas, but I think sometimes feel hesitant or fearful to reach out to professors. So as we are in an opportunity where we get to speak in a faculty forum, just encouraging our professors to reach out to students and ask what they're wanting out of their program, because a lot of students are feeling hesitant, unsure, and ill-prepared at times for interacting in these conversations about race and culture and how to enter those relationships later on down the road as a therapist. So thank you so much for listening to our little spiel on CARS. It was an absolute joy to get to work with Naomi on this project, and really great to get to talk to you all today on it.
Thank you for being here and for being willing to do this, because this is, you're talking to how many, 80 of us? 80 faculty, on this call. So thank you. Yeah, snaps. And it really taps into something that I know Hakeem and I will be talking about later, which is community care and the ways we look out for each other. And y'all are doing that with your student colleagues. And that's really, really cool to see. Like, we know y'all are all right, but it's really cool to see you doing that. That's great. That's cool. So I'm going to share my screen again, and Melita is going to help me out. We're going to help each other out with heading into this next section, which is kind of the core of what we're doing today. So that is to sort of ground ourselves in this terminology that we're always or frequently using and may not always be operating from the same types of definitions and perspectives. So in a perfect world, yes! This doesn't always work, y'all, where I hit the button and it goes where I want it to go. So continue breathing, because like we know, conversations about racial equity can get stressful. So we want to define terms relating to racial equity and anti-oppressive practice and encourage an honest and self-interrogative look at your own self-location and institutional ecology. And these are things we'll break down as we go. And then to inspire further conversation, because this is going to continue into October. So that's that. So when we talk about self-locations, all of us are going to be speaking to definitions of some terms from our own self-location. Seeing the results from young professionals, or as a young professional, did you feel prepared? Slightly seems to be the leading option there. That's cool. But yeah, when we talk about self-location, this is just an example of what self-location can look like. Not every one of us is going to be sharing a big artsy thing like this, but this is just an example of what it can look like. So I've got elements of my origins as a person, the flag from the state of North Dakota where I was born, flag from the country of St. Vincent and the Grenadines where my parents were born, and the great state of Indiana, which currently holds me now, and the logo for Indiana University. which oversees, oh my goodness, IUPUI, where I am now, and The Tale of My Cat, Tina Turner. There are many principles that guide what I do that I'm not going to go into here, because I think we can sort of figure out what some of them are just by the nature of the fact that I'm here. And all of the things that I witness in relation to my lived experience are things that I carry with me into the work that I do, and I think that's true of all of us. Everybody carries every part of themselves into a room at any given point in time. A term I've been using recently is holistic, but spelled WHO, with intentionality and gratitude towards Renee Linkletter, who's an Indigenous scholar who's suggested utilizing that term to sort of relate specifically to the wholeness with which we all enter into a space. So I don't know, Melita, if you wanted to chime in anything on self-locations or anything that's on this slide. I know we also have a second poll question that relates to this too. Hakeem, if you want to send that out. But Melita, anything you want to share on your self-location?
Yeah, I think for me, I am a first generation born in the States. Both of my parents are from Belize. So for me, I was always navigating two systems. My Black African American system when I was in school settings, but then my parents, especially my dad, had no desire to assimilate to American culture. In fact, he didn't even become a voting citizen until I was an adult. And so living in that very traditional space, and how do you enter spaces? Which hat are you wearing? Which space are you wearing? What do people assume about you when you walk into the space? And then navigating that as I have lived in 5 of the 7 regions as a music therapist, as a music therapy student. So just kind of similarly going off of some of the things that Natasha shared, and how you can't turn that off when you go into a space.
Right, exactly. So there's sort of these prompts in here as people are answering the poll question relating to self-location to consider if, you know, as you're designing your own, like how you situate yourself within the frame of oppression as a whole. You know, the slide on there says anti-Black racism, which we'll talk specifically about in a second, but that's a valuable question to ask yourself. What are you, how do you connect to all of those issues? What are you complicit in? What is something that you've witnessed in music therapy that contributes to that self-location? What are your aspirational values for yourself and your work? And what frames all of that? Those are all important questions to be asking ourselves. Yeah, there should be 5 options to the question. Mine got cut off as well. So I don't know. I just saw that comment come in. I don't know what happened there. But Hakeem, are we able to share the results from what has come in? I wonder if it got cut off for everybody. It got cut off for Melita
Yeah,
too.
I think it did, but maybe you can contextualize a little bit.
I can, yeah. So the additional 2 options that got cut off there were to say that you integrate your location of self into, actually it was just one option that got cut off, integrating your location of self into every level of your practice. And there'll be another survey that will go out at the end of this that will include a reframing of this question as well. So you'll have another opportunity to answer it. But yeah, it sounds as though a good percentage of people are familiar with them, just haven't really done a lot of integrating of them. So hopefully those little questions and tips that I mentioned are helpful for creating yours. But as we go, you'll hear us all speak from our self-locations as we define these terms and model some ways that you can integrate your self-location into everyday moments of discussion relating to racial equity. Yeah. Cool. Okay. I don't wanna, okay, take me back to the terms. There we go. Okay, so I'll have the term list here briefly so everyone can see all the terms, and then I'm gonna turn my screen share off so that we can all engage with each other's wonderful faces. So we're gonna start with intersectional oppression, go to anti-Black racism and weathering, talk about the GEMM structure, which Marisol will spell that out for us, and tokenization, white dominant culture, systemic violence, white guilt and fragility, resistance, justice and equity, anti-racist and anti-oppressive practice, and liberation. And the idea here is going to be, again, to just sort of have a free-flowing conversation between folks. We know as panelists that a couple of us are going to be leading individual terms, but we also have an agreement that at any moment, if one of us is feeling like hopping in and saying more, that we can. Yeah. So Adenike and I are slated to start with intersectional oppression. I have thoughts. Adenike, do you have thoughts?
Sure. I was thinking of the term basically from my self-location. So I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago. Spent my formative years in the Caribbean. I also went to high school in Jamaica, and then came up to the US at around age 18 to study music and then music therapy. And I see intersectional oppression as that, you're coming from more than one identity that experiences oppression, right?
Yes.
So there's something so it's not just me as a Black person, but it's me as a Black woman. And in this case, telling my origin story as a Black woman immigrant coming in and experiencing discrimination or oppression. And to be honest, I didn't realize that's what it was until after, right? I remember, and it was things I probably laughed off and thought, well, how ignorant are these people to ask these questions, but not recognizing the framework that's where it's coming from. I mean, I had people ask me questions like, how long did it take you to learn to speak American? Like people ask me stuff like, do you know what a hamburger is? Have you ever eaten one? So just things that would seem kind of weird, and I don't want to say weird, but assuming a standard of normal, that certain things were normal, and my having not been in this environment made me abnormal in some ways. And one of the formative experiences I had began to help me question what it meant to be Black and an immigrant. I noticed when I showed up in classes as an undergrad, if I didn't speak in class, I often wasn't paid attention to by white peers or by white professors. I was just a body there. When I opened my mouth and they heard my accent, there was a shift. And then I realized too, when I opened my mouth and used big words that I always use in conversation, there's another shift. And at first I thought like, oh, so they're responding to me in this positive way because I'm a good one. And it took me years to realize, well, what does that mean if I'm a good one? Does that mean if I just look like other Black people and don't say anything particular in an accent or frame words a certain way, that I'm not a good one, that to just be Black is not good? Because without actually saying that I'm a good one, I often got messages saying that I'm different from other Black people, that I'm better in some ways than Black people because I was this exotic sort of being coming from the Caribbean. And I think in some ways that while initially I may have been flattered by that because I didn't understand all that was happening there, it kind of messed with my head in terms of figuring out where I fit, because the longer I've lived in this country, the Blacker I've become in the sense that, the longer I've lived here, the more people just see me as a Black person and will treat me as they treat their understanding of Black people. So to be treated as, to be exoticized and in some ways tokenized like that, kind of set up this way of, one, it made me feel different. Like I didn't quite fit with the white people because now I'm on this level, and then I didn't quite fit with other Black people. And it might seem weird, but to think of it as intersectional oppression, but there are these ideas that come out about what people believe of immigrants, and not just immigrants in general, but immigrants in particular regions. Because yes, I was exoticized, but I was also expected to have a more, for lack of a better term, primitive experience. Like there were still people who would ask questions: do you live in trees? Do you have money? So even though I'm from the beautiful islands, I'm not supposed to know big words. I'm not supposed to be advanced in my thinking or my technological experience. I'm supposed to be one of those lesser fortunate people that you see and you send money to, or that serve you when you go to the tropical resort. So it was really an interesting experience to start reckoning with what all these messages are. And It's been a process for years. Like, I think, and especially in light of, what has happened in the last, 5-10 years in terms of racial injustice, police brutality against Black and brown bodies, like it really made me question, where do I fit as Black immigrant woman in this country? And it's still something I'm trying to piece out, So I guess that's what I have to share about intersectional oppression in that regard. So.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you made a distinction to say that intersectionality is about oppression. Every time I hear somebody use the term intersectionality and refer to it only as something that's about having multiple identities, my eyes cannot possibly roll further back into my head, and I know that I can't trust you in that conversation because you don't know that intersectionality is about oppression, right? So it's about, like in the case of my self-location, my Blackness, my femness, my queerness, my Afro-spirituality, all of that converging to a point that I am oppressed in a way that is unique from someone who is living the immigrant experience like you are, from someone who is living, a different religious minority experience than myself, and all of that. So the brief example that I'll share before we move on to the next term, and I've been knowing that I wanted to share this for a while, but my heart rate just picked up because I was like, you haven't talked about the white supremacist in North Dakota. You haven't talked about that publicly, but I'm about to. And Megan just, yes, hold space for me. Megan knows about this. So when we were in North Dakota, at the University of North Dakota, I was doing a lot of activism work in my small town of Grand Forks, and getting noticed. And that comes with people being cranky on the internet, and whatever, you brush it off, you move on. But I posted a video unrelated to any of the diversity work that I was doing. It was a video of my students and I playing an Orff arrangement of a song they had selected. The song was Iggy Azalea's Fancy, which, just for the record, for my street cred, I am not an Iggy Azalea fan. I did this for my students. But about a week, not even a week after that video got posted, I was notified by some friends and local police that that video had been posted on the white supremacist website Stormfront. And under the heading, Negress, Natasha Thomas teaches rap to white girls. Like, again, Iggy Azalea, y'all. But I know, I laugh about it. But at the same time, I had to give a copy of my schedule to local law enforcement. I had to have law enforcement come speak to my students. I had to tell my family that we were on this website. For those who don't know anything about Stormfront, it's linked to several deaths. It's a website where white supremacists network and plan terrible things. So not a great place to be. And I was placed there because I was doing my job. But I had been noticed by this person because I had, been vocal about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But other people that I was working with also got targeted, but the way they got targeted was unique. I was targeted specifically as the negress, and the targeting of me was the most extreme. I had Muslim colleagues who were working with me who were targeted in different ways. I had a colleague who was a friend of mine who belly danced who was targeted in different ways, involving body shaming and that sort of thing. So intersectionality is about oppression, and all of those things, in my mind, stem from anti-Blackness, which leads to the next term that I'll invite Marisol to share in discussion of. I think that that color is like the thing that deepens every form of oppression. When you add race and specifically Blackness to the equation, everything gets deeper. Yeah, so I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, and I think, thank you, Natasha and Adenike, for kind of laying that foundation and really taking the risks to share your identity in this very public space. And I know definitely from personal experience, that's not an easy thing to do. And for Black women, that has a very specific impact and load. So I think that thinking about anti-Blackness, really, again, and even with intersectionality, I'm going to add something to that layer of oppression, is really thinking about how systems and cultural norms serve to reinforce the different types of stigmas that continue to oppress various groups at these combined and compounded oppressions, right? And so for anti-Blackness, the ways in which I see it is kind of reinforcing the hierarchies of race and racism and this racial oppression in ways that serve to dehumanize, particularly Black peoples, dehumanize Black representations, Black musical, Black cultures that include music, just like Naomi and Grace were talking about before about the use of hip hop and reggae being ostracized and demonized in courses or in different academic spaces. That sounds like an old, kind of dated conversation that I had when I haven't been in the field that long, but when I was in classrooms kind of exploring that concept, but it's a persistent thing because it's connected to this idea of anti-Blackness. And so kind of coming into this work, I'm also going to kind of socially locate myself, but in a different way, in saying that, yes, I am a Black woman of African Jamaican descent who came to the United States very young at the age of 3 and lived in various regions of the US, New York, the South, Florida, where I am right now, Alabama, Ohio. I've kind of moved and been around in different places. But I think one of the ways in which I understand my social identity is linked to the ways in which I kind of sense and exist in the world, right? My embodied experience of being in this skin, in this body, in this world, and in this context, right? In these different systems. And so the ways in which I came to this conversation, and particularly these ideas of anti-Blackness, really stemmed from many ways to negate my senses. And I know Lee Monroe talks a lot about what it means to negate one's senses. It's like one of the worst things someone can do, where a person is not able to trust their sight, their hearing, their scent, whatever the sense may be. Whatever we have access to be able to understand the world around us. When we're told those things are no longer valid, or those things are no longer trustworthy in moving throughout the world, it does something very harmful. And I look at anti-Blackness and racism and racial oppression and any type of racial injustice as a form of violence, right, to the body and violence towards people. It has a way of enacting a type of harm and violence onto the body and to the psyche in a way that creates the kind of bifurcation of self, a double consciousness, a crazy making, and I use that word.
Yes.
Exactly what it is, crazy making, so that a person is not able to exist in the world and trust their sensed reality. Yeah. And so within this kind of form of anti-Blackness, at the root of it is the dehumanization of Black people to the point of being non-human, right? And then along the spectrum or the continuum of color and race, right, that is part of the different types of racial hierarchies and racial continuums, the closer you, or the farther away from that point of Blackness, is where an individual becomes more and more acceptable. Doesn't mean that they experience less harm, but they become more and more acceptable within a white supremacist system. And so within this context of anti-Blackness, there are multiple types of harm that happen specifically to Black peoples and Black communities and Black individuals, Black students, Black professors, Black therapists, Black clients. And I'm saying blackity black, 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 because it's important to say that. It's important to acknowledge that their Blackness and our ideas and our experiences of Blackness is at the root of how race and racism was created, and the ways in which we built systems was really supported around the cognitive dissonance of dealing with that type of dehumanization. And so the dehumanization of Blackness is then also tethered to the dehumanization that comes from oppressing one in their Blackness. So whiteness and white superiority has a certain level of dehumanization as well. Mm-hmm. And so within this frame of anti-Blackness, it's a war, and it's a ridiculous war in which no one wins. Like no one even wins within the superiority or the supremacy of whiteness. Like no one wins. And so I think navigating those worlds and having to watch no one winning and then feeling the impact of violence, and to a point now where I'm deprogramming myself around this, to a point where I am really tapped into the feelings that I have in my body. And I will move towards making sense and meaning of that feeling before I move towards negating it. And so that's the ways in which I understand anti-Blackness really functioning, because it really talks about the core of humanity and how all people on the spectrum of race that has been used to really support racism has demonized and dehumanized people to the point of, to the point of dehumanization. How much can I say that?
Right.
But,
yeah.
It really does happen in a broad way.
Right. Which sort of ties us into the next term of weathering.
Can I jump in?
Yeah. Yes, please, Sue.
I just want to bring in a point that's in the news at the moment, but Trump talking about racehorses and breeding, and that's about as anti-Black racist as you can get, and it's tie into eugenics, and is just this horrific moment that like we're in at the moment. And I just wanted to add that because it's like, I think these are the things we need to be listening out for at the moment, and addressing with our students and explaining that these aren't just little things about animals.
Yeah, right.
These are references to historical horrors. And that they're repeating right now, right? I mean, they've always been here, but they're being said out loud by the person who's supposed to be at the top. You know?
They're not dog whistles anymore. They are blatant whistles, blatant calls. And I think too, we also need to recognize not only those calls happening, but we need to recognize their watered down descendants. Like within the story that I shared about the white supremacists, there is a central, you can't teach our girls, right? You can't do this work. How dare you do this work? Watered down in that is questioning of my qualifications. And believe me, that has happened in music therapy. All of these things are connected. All of these things are connected, and we have to recognize that. And we have to hold space for when that gets called out. If someone says to you, this thing that you just did was harmful to me, and your response is to make it about you and say what your intentions were, you have damaged that relationship irreparably. Yup. And I tie that, I don't know if you want to say more about that, Marisol, and then we can get to weathering, but yeah.
No, but I think it bridges perfectly into weathering. We can jump in there.
Yeah, I just I'm thinking about what you said, Marisol, about tapping into your body, and how the part of us that gets made, the crazy making that happens as a result of anti-Blackness, how I recognize those signs in my body more and more each day. And I fight those feelings more and more each day. I have less and less patience for them every day. And I think that that relates to the weathering effect that racism can have on your body, because depending on, you know, what sort of health conditions might run in your family, I mean, we see the literal impact of racism on our health and wellness every single day. And for me, stress and increased heart rate, body temperature rising, all of those things are bad for my health conditions. And so it can be damaging not just to my mental health and my relationships with people, but to my physical health over time.
Yeah.
And that's what weathering is.
Yeah. And Arlene Geronimus
Thank you.
came up
Yes.
with a term as a Black woman that was looking at allocastic loads on Black women at those intersections, right? So just kind of reaffirming Natasha talking about relational conflict and tensions, talking about emotional suppression, right? Chronic pain, mental health, trauma, material hardship, all the different gender-based, because that's also where weathering is really coming from, Black feminist lens, and race-based stressors that really were enacting violence to the body in a specific type of way. But again, very real and very relevant to classroom spaces. And I think that what we don't really think about and are the ways in which students, and then I'll talk about maybe, you know, just people of color in the field in general, but particularly students, the ways in which those different types of narratives, different types of tropes, different types of stereotypes, various types of expectations of exceptionality that, like Adenike was talking about, of being now almost now the exceptional Negro because of fitting different, checking off certain types of boxes, right? Of articulateness. That means that there's an exceptionality now, right? Which is another form of racism. It's another trope that says that to speak a certain way means that you are now different than all the others, which in reality is not truly real. there are, you know, it doesn't degrade anyone's intelligence. And nor does speaking in different ways and having different communication styles, that doesn't degrade or is not as a place of devaluation either. But like all those different things, again, leads to immediate distress, right? It leads to prolonged mental distress. It leads to lower self-concept. It leads to sometimes depressive symptoms, and it impacts the ways in which we appraise stress, impacts the types of coping in which we take on. It impacts the overall health outcomes that we have. So they're all very much interconnected and happens in classroom spaces. And so when I see students, you know, having uprisings and speaking truth to power, it's really a way in which they reinforce their agented selves, their agency within a space, and decide to kind of release themselves from those types and those points of violence, whether they're aware of it or not. That is, in essence, what I see happening. And so I feel like a lot of times people say, you know, are like, oh no, how do we just appease our students or kind of address their issues that they have right now, but get them to kind of understand the professional context, to think about the ways in which it impacts them in the world, all these different ways to kind of circumvent these conversations, where in reality, organizing, community building, collective advocacy, collective movements to speak to their own ways of being in the world is a form of managing weathering, right? I'm looking at the time, Natasha. I don't think
we thought this might happen. And we will be. Brief plug for Marisol and I's presentation at AMTA about weathering. We could really talk about this forever. But yeah, we're looking at, so we had talked about, as a group, we talked about building in some time for us to like breathe and recenter. And we were going to go through a couple more terms before we went there, but I think we're all feeling it now. We were just talking in the chat that like, yeah, let's feel that. But I know Hakeem has another poll that he's going to put up, and so we'll give folks a second to see that and answer that. Yeah, regarding conversations about race and racism with your students, whether or not those have been had. So we'll give folks a minute to answer that poll, encourage some breathing, maybe stretch if you need it. And then Adenike, will hand back to you if you want to share, yeah, after folks have a chance to answer. And yes, I just saw the comment suggestion to invite folks to Saturday's workshop by Nsamu Munga on global listening circles and anti-oppressive practice. Also, Black Creative Healing episode 104 is with Nsamu Munga. Worth it. Anytime you can engage with Nsamu, do it.
Okay, Natasha, is it time for me? Is that?
Yes, I apologize. Yes.
No, just I wanted to give people time.
Oh,
okay.
yeah. So we can see the poll results, but yeah, then off
Nice,
to.
nice. Okay.
Can I just double check on something there? I know we have just a few more terms. Is that correct? Before Adenike's?
That was the original plan. Yeah, we're taking a moment now, and then I think we'll do probably another one later. Yeah.
Okay.
So I am going to be sharing some poems that came out of my arts-based dissertation. The full title, The Full Has Never Been Told, an arts-based narrative inquiry into the academic and professional experiences of Black people in American music therapy. Long title. I was fortunate to speak with 3 students, 4 clinicians, and 3 educators who identified as Black, basically trying to see what their experience has been in the field, how they feel about their perceptions regarding health and music and therapy, whether they felt that was integrated in learning environments and working environments, or whether they felt it didn't quite fit. And in the course of engaging with the participants and looking at the data, I was able to create poems using words that they said, and in some cases, for artistic purposes, sort of either paraphrasing what they said to kind of lend it to a more poetic flow, so to speak. And I would like to share here one poem from a student. Her pseudonym is Yolande. She was an undergrad student at the time, and she spoke about what it felt like to be her in this program. So this is Yolande. In this world, things are not as they seem. I stand out as a sore thumb, alone and unlike the others. I feel I'm 10 steps behind. All that I bring, new ideas, music, myself, is just thrown out the window. Overwhelmed by having to learn their repertoire, I wish they would try to learn mine. It is easy to stay with the familiar, but so limiting to us all. We should embrace other people's music. Accept everyone who is different from us, as well as see that we are one. Reject the stereotypes. If someone else doesn't know me fully, I know myself. There's way more to me inside me that people should see in everyone. Music tells my story. It is my peace of mind. Music befriends me on this journey. I want it to be the voice for people who are silent. In this different world, I dare to challenge negativity. I keep pushing, keep persisting. The only person who can really stop you during the journey is yourself. Natasha, just in the interest of time, should I just allow here for people to resume the discussion of the terms?
I was just about to type that into the panelist chat and ask us, because I
Sorry
know
about
you had a couple.
Yes.
Yes, and I think that based on how, here's what I'll propose, just transparently, based on how things have been going, if we're going to be, you know, the conversation's so rich and deep with each of these that we may want to just splice a couple every few terms.
No problem. Sure.
How do people feel about that? I love them, and I'm so grateful that you've done this work and that you're willing to share it this way.
I'm happy to share. Thank you.
Cool. Our next two terms are actually back to Marisol again as primary facilitator on them. The GEMM, which is a new term to me, so I'm excited to hear more about that. And then tokenization are our next two terms.
And actually they're both, I'm going to keep those somewhat brief because I think that they're, again, a continuation of what we've already been talking about, but more so it speaks to the ways in which minoritized individuals, peoples of color, are expected to kind of conform to this idea of exceptionality. And exceptionality is used in a lot of different ways. I know how that's used in disability discourse as well. But here within this kind of term of exceptionality, it really highlights the idea of tokenization as a way in which minorities are expected to perform or kind of cooperate or co-labor within this kind of performative activism from dominant systems, whether it be organizational systems, whether it be classroom systems, whatever the bodies are, or whoever is in the room, but take on this point of representation, but really not having any power, right? It's like understanding that there's something there, but denying the power within. Ken Hardy talks about the GEM therapist. So Ken Hardy is a couples and family therapist, and well-known and very renowned for his discussions on race within therapy disciplines. And so he talks about what it means to become a GEM therapist, and that's the good, effective model minority. And so I see this as an intersection on any minority within a work, but definitely when it comes to race, which is the conversation that he was having in the book, Revisioning Family Therapy, Race, Culture, and Gender in Clinical Practice, that came out in 2008. And he still uses this model. But he talks about how the GEM therapist, and I want you to actually think about the ways in which you may see this happening within the field, the ways in which you may either embody it, being within a target or an agent location, ways in which you've witnessed it, embodied it, enacted it in some form, shape, or fashion. So for a GEM therapist, so that good model minority, they're expected to extend their role of caregiver to members of the white dominant profession, whether it be teachers, fellow therapists, the profession and the body as a whole, by accepting a color-evasive stance within the field and never really talking about intersectionality, power, privilege, or oppression. They're supposed to appease the white majority by increasing their comfort. So increasing the dominant majority's comfort to the minority's own demise. They always have to smile, right? Smile incessantly. Some people here know it because I have a story, I'll hold it actually because of time, but smiling incessantly through hurt, harm, pain, whatever. I'm going to tell the story very briefly. I remember going to a workshop series with Ken Hardy. He was very much a mentor and supervisor in a particular period of time when I was coming in contact with conversations on race. And I remember I was speaking about something very traumatic that happened in my classroom experiences and experience of discrimination that I had. And while I was speaking about it, I smiled the whole time. And I didn't realize I was smiling about discrimination and going to the Office of Equity and Equality and then having to leave my program and having to leave my scholarship and having to leave everything that I'd worked hard for. And then he was just like, you say that all with a smile. And he has a way of saying things that just cuts through the room. And when he said that, the only thing that came to me was like, I smile so I don't have to cry. And I broke down in tears because that is an expectation to show that you are being good and you're behaving yourself. And I think from a feminist lens, many women understand that concept too, right? Having to smile and being told to smile and being told to appease the patriarchal majority. But here, the racial and the white dominant majority oftentimes. Work twice as hard, be twice as smart. Know everyone else's musical repertoire and know your own for when you need it. Because that's a way in which we reinforce this work twice as hard and be twice as smart, right? Because you have to come out of yourself to learn and translate other people's music while also having to know yours very well and having that as a resource. Become comfortable with their own invisibility and the invisibility of other minoritized students and therapists. So everyone has to kind of make sure that that's just a commonplace, right? Because we got to smile through it. Keep hope alive that the goodwill of other white people within the profession will afford us the needed progress. So anytime we are expected to activate ourselves and use our agency to do something, there's this expectation that we need to stop and wait for the dominant majority to move us ahead. And we know that doesn't really happen the way in which the majority usually thinks it happens. So I already said keep hope alive. But become comfortable with a bifurcation of self. So a splitness of self, a double consciousness, vacillating between different worlds. So you can exist, embrace the values of the field that encourage difference, but reward sameness. So someone can speak and say, we appreciate difference within this space. In your classroom, you might say that. But if someone brings up brings a certain type of music, or brings up a particular critique, or brings up a different idea that doesn't really fit within the frame, how do our different, what are the norms within the classroom? What are the norms within our assessment? What are the norms within our grading, what have you? That reinforces that sameness is actually what's valued here. And so people learn to okay, I got spanked on the hand in that way. It might not be literal. It might have been in a way of saying, hey, that's different. Well, I didn't know that really existed. That's a way of kind of showing someone that they don't really belong. And that oftentimes seems like it's a different type of punishment for being different in a space, right? Relentlessly supporting the profession at all costs, even when it doesn't acknowledge or support minority communities. I'll just let that sit. Legitimize and defend culturally uninformed theory and practice. And so our field has, for an extended period of time, has not really taken enough time to look at race and racism and how it's embedded within our theories and our practices, and even in our examination, our certification processes, like looking at all and unpacking all of those pieces, but yet we're supposed to legitimize and defend it, right? Buffer the accountability of others and accept sole responsibility for all minoritized clients. Develop situational systemic worldviews. So we only look at race and culture and racism and racial sensitivity in particular instances when it counts by the person that has allowed us to say that it counts. Learn deficit-oriented language from minoritized clients. This idea of primitivism and primal is something that is, even though many people might not use it in their normal everyday occurrence, it's in our literature. It's also part of our speaking. There's other words and there's other language that is linked to deficit-oriented language for our clients and for students, right? That lists them as deviant or lists them as lazy or lists them as non-compliant. There's a lot of words that we can use around that. Strengthen the development of a disempowered minority psyche and become comfortable with being judged by other standards. So we're supposed to get more and more comfortable with this and strengthen this thing that kills us while everyone tries to grow and bloom and do what they need to do in the field. And spend all our time, and this is not Ken, this is Audre Lorde, but spend all our time caretaking for the master's house, learning the master's tools, but never finding freedom within. Like, that's a lot of work. And that is exactly what is expected for those that are tokenized in this field. So I really want us to think and sit with that. Like, what does that feel like? What does that sound like? If it made you feel uncomfortable or made you say, that's not right, that's not true, I think you should really take time to think about what that thing was that might have rubbed you the wrong way. Things rubbed me the wrong way. So it's like, like really sit and think about what that thing is that might have sounded like, I can't sit with that, and really lean into that. Because that's a place that needs work and needs exploration. And it's really embedded in the systems of music therapy. It's not something that's overt. It's part of our developmental process in these areas and these conversations.
Yeah. And that takes us perfectly actually into Melida's area of discussing white dominant culture. And then we'll have Sue chime in with discussions of systemic violence. And that's after that is where we have another poetic break planned. But yeah, take it away, Melida.
Yeah, the best part about going later is that I'm over here like taking notes, like, yeah, that's what I was feeling. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Right. No, some of these people already do this for me on the phone during the weeks normally. So I have all 3 degrees of music therapy, right? And I was a lover of music therapy. This is it. But I have to say, the most racist things, the most oppressed things happened to me when I got at the highest point of my career, which makes no sense to me. That was discongruent to me. So when I had a PhD and I started working in higher education, that is when I noticed such dismissal in the classroom. That's a whole other thing, right? And then as I moved up within AMCA, I'm just gonna be honest, right? Like the more I move up, the more ridiculous, like, wait, did that just happen, right? And one of the things is I do smile a lot. So there is an expectation I am learning now, especially in even my new role in my university, right? There was an expectation that when I was leading with my smiling that I'm just gonna be here and you can check off the box for diversity, except no, I'm actually gonna make you integrate diversity into this thing. And I'm not afraid to speak up. So the more I speak up, how am I othered in those spaces? How am I no longer welcome in those spaces? How am I silenced in those spaces? How am I now becoming the person that just can't get along? If I am raising my voice, it's because I am tired of having told you the same thing over and over again, right? And I can recognize the white dominant culture. I can recognize your dismissal and I'm tired of it, right? And because it's happening in so many spaces, I can see it before you even see it, right? I notice it. It's like, oh, really? That's what's happening? It's about race? I don't think it was about race. It's always about race, right? And being able to hold that space and stop getting so uncomfortable. And so for me, I've thought about a couple of the frameworks that I use. I love Deepa Iyer's social change ecosystem. Someone shared that with me this summer and it changed my life. The technical little problem with it though is that people latch onto it and they're like, yes, I'm a weaver, I'm a storyteller, but then there's no action behind those things. It's just like, I checked off my box, see, I'm not racist. And it's like, but we have a whole bunch of racial tension going on our campus. Do you know that? Right? Like, or we have these race things going on inside our organization. Do you know that? What about when I bring race into my classroom and I'm telling my students about, there's a right-wing group that's raising funds for this person. And then we had the anti-Semitic things that got put on campus. And then we had this Black protest for Black Lives Matter that, did you know this happened on Sunday? Huh? And as I'm saying those things in the chat, is there any unbiased sources on this? And I'm like, that's really funny. When I talk to you about aging, when I talk to you about mental health, when I talk to you about all the other things in our curriculum, you don't ask me for unbiased sources, right? But here you are, I'm saying something that is uncomfortable to you. Now I expect the uncomfortableness, so I had my links ready and put it in the chat, right? But I think as we are all starting to move forward in the field, I'm gonna name off some of the white dominant culture things, but I think in addition to knowing it, it's not enough. Even bringing it into your organizations is not enough. You have to really think about what is your system to combat it, right? Because people can speak in the words, but when it's time to stand up and say, you know what, this actually isn't okay. This is perpetuating overworking, right? We had a mandate that we might need to think about offering extra classes during summer or extra classes during a break while not playing people. Like, well, that's not something that we should be doing while we're all healing. Let's unpack that you do have a choice in this matter. You do get to say, as a unit, we're gonna maybe say this doesn't center equity and this doesn't feel right for us. But empowering someone to have that space and be willing to stand up with you, I find is a place where people struggle a little bit. Fear of open conflict. I work with another Black man in my office. We were both put into this new space and we were disagreeing on something. And it was like a ping pong match for my dean. He was going back and forth like that. I was like, Dante, I don't think you did that right. I don't think I had a problem, right? And we're going back and forth. However, for both of us, our lived experiences as Black people is that we don't talk behind the back. We say out loud what we mean in that moment. And when my dean said, this is fascinating, I was like, what does that even mean to you? Like, why should this be fascinating? And then I realized, oh, everybody plays the game of we all smile and we give good claps on the camera or in the meeting. And then behind the meeting is when we go and we push down the people who said this. Did you see the way she acted? She raised her voice. She wasn't smiling. All these things that I'm allowed to feel all of those things. I'm allowed to say, that's not a good decision, right? And we're in a space where diversity is being pushed on campuses like no one's business because of the space that we live in. But there's not much thought behind except for checking off the box, right? So how do we really integrate? No, we're gonna make this change. And if we're gonna make this change, I'm not doing all the heavy lifting by myself. I am tired. You have to lift, you have to stand up, you have to give up something, right? I always have to give up good student evals by just being Melita every time I come into a classroom. By golly, why don't you? That doesn't quite seem to be fair. Defensiveness is another part in that white dominant culture, right? And so it's so odd because I can see people ping pong back and forth with me. On Tuesday, you agree, you are down for equity. On Wednesday, you think this is a rumor. On Thursday, you're down with me again. It's like, wait, what? No, it means being consistent all the time. And who would have ever thought that Maslow's hierarchy of needs was my new favorite tool that I have to keep saying? Because I have to keep reminding people, safety, basic level, food, water, home, safety. This is not safe what you are doing. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm like therapizing all these people at work. Who knew that my roles, right? But trying to find those spaces to actually let it sit in for people that what you are doing is harmful. What you are saying is harmful. You are getting defensive. And instead of getting defensive, sit with that uncomfort for a little bit and think about what's an action step. Because I gotta sit and be uncomfortable every time I walk into a room as the only that is present, right? Or when I'm showing up to a meeting and you just don't think that Melita Belgrave could possibly be Black, because in some far off space, that's not a Black name. And so you just walk past me and I'm just like, well, when are we gonna start this meeting? Hello, I'm here. And then you see the eyes, the foot's going in the mouth. Everyone's so uncomfortable, right? So I think one of the things that I would challenge everyone is to say when we do it to others, because we all do it, right? Just because I'm Black does not mean that I don't do it to others, right? And being aware, being, yes, vulnerable, but not defensive, Hakeem, and being aware of when we do it, self-correct so we can get better. When we are in those spaces of vulnerability, I can share with you when I mess up sometimes, and holding each other accountable. I think that's the one other thing that could be really important, a system of accountability where you can say, hey, that's a little defensive. Hey, that's kind of overworking. Hey, that's equity washing and that's not okay. We don't want to do that here anymore. And so thinking about what you have to give up though, right? Because now I am no longer nice Melita, right? Like, you know, people, I don't get invited to happy hours anymore. Like, my social network went like this because my very existence reminds you of something that you don't want to think about. You realize that you can no longer not see me as a whole human, which involves my race, and that becomes a problem. And so I'm going to pause now and say thank you to Grace. You'll still happy hour with me. I appreciate it. And hand over to our next person. Thank y'all.
So I think I'm supposed to locate myself socially, culturally before I start. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do that partly talking about what my term to talk about is, which is systemic violence or structural violence. I'm coming as a middle-aged, educated at the top of the profession, at the top of the rank in terms of, professor, cis woman, heterosexual, grew up in Australia, came to the United States, but was born here, so had citizenship as soon as I came. And so I'm in many ways a representative of many dominant systems. And so that's just to locate myself. I've been working to understand how we're located differently and what kinds of harms I can perpetuate, and sometimes actively uphold because of what it might bring to me. And so the way I want to talk about systemic and structural violence is that often we point fingers at other people for things that we feel that they do wrong. And we don't look at the systems. So in music therapy, we might think that by pointing fingers, or what some people call out culture, what that does is that helps to distance ourselves from the problem, and it helps us to feel less bad as somebody else. But I think that that's really problematic when we do that. And so in terms of music therapy, the way that we are engaging in systemic violence is the ways in which we're upholding institutionally within our profession ableism, sexism, Eurocentrism, anti-Black racism, all cisgenderism, all kinds of ways in which we are doing violence onto people who are from each of those groups. And today I just really want to talk about how that works in terms of anti-Black racism, because that's the focus of this one, although I do think about all of them, is in the ways in which, and we've talked about all of these, but we have to think about the harm that it does. Whose work are we using in our curricula? Whose work are we citing when we're writing articles? Whose theories are we drawing from? Whose are we not? So it's not just whose are we, but who are we not including? And so that is across every part of our curriculum. When we're doing research, when we're teaching research, when we're teaching assessment, when we're teaching about supervision, when we're supervising, when we're in every single case, how is that coming about in our everyday practice? Who are we hiring? Who are we letting into our programs? What music are we engaging in? All of those things help people to feel that this is a place for you, or this is a place not for you, right? And so if you've never felt, is this a place not for me, then you're probably in the dominant group, and the system is probably there for you, and you haven't had to get the double consciousness that Marisol was talking about, So someone asked me yesterday in a podcast, actually, in what ways in your pedagogy do you practice trauma-informed pedagogy? And I had to think about it for a little while, because we don't often think about that. But thinking about how to not continue the harm that we continually do, even though, as different people have said, it may not be intentional, we have to very, very intentionally not do it. So it's not whether we do something intentionally, It's what are we doing intentionally to change the system? What are we doing to deconstruct those systems, or to at least have something else in place? You know, if we can't deconstruct it all on our own, but how can we as a faculty forum deconstruct the way that we do music therapy? Why are we continuing to do things the way they've always been done just because they've been done that way? Why can't we just scrap it all and start again with a very different intention? And if we can't do that, what can we do individually within this system to change it for at least our system? You know, how can we scrap what we're teaching and just start again? I think that we're doing so much violence to the people that we're working with, and it's not individually, it's systemically. That's all I want to say on that. I forgot to hand over. It's to Adenike, right?
That's okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Sue. Well, I was just kind of sitting with what you just said. Like, yeah. Just, yeah. I would like to share another poem from my dissertation. This one is in the voice of a professional who also kind of touched on her experience as a student and what she thought would be helpful for people to learn going forward. So this is from Sasha. Pissed off, frustrated. You see my culture, then appropriate it. I took my time to learn yours right, but mine is ignored because it's not white. I didn't have a choice but to learn these songs. To hear you don't know mine rubs me wrong. Respect my culture and my music. Put in the effort to truly use it in ways that show you understand the context, the meaning, the lay of the land. Think about our clients as a whole. We can use more than pop. There's soul, R&B, rap, gospel, and Motown. Artists like Ella and others of renown. Our clients deserve music diversity. So do more than you learned in university. It brings me joy to be an MT, especially when I can be me, a Black woman who knows her culture well and has so many insights she'll gladly tell to white colleagues so they can realize the impact of their attitudes and not theorize on what they think people of color should be in our small world of music therapy. So as I get this off my chest, I put before you a simple test. Will you look within at your biases? Will you recognize the varieties of experience that comprise us, define us, empower, or marginalize us? Will you use that knowledge to change what we do? Or will you ignore it because it challenges you? And I pass it on to the next speaker.
So yeah, Naomi and I were charged to to discuss white guilt and fragility. So I'll start us off with the term white guilt. This is something that I think was quite infectious this summer, at least on social media, and rampant in just a knee-jerk reaction of trying to not come across as racist, but being faced with your privilege that you may not have been accustomed to, at least. That it was my experience as a person who grew up in the most segregated city in the United States, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Went to diverse schools, but as we discussed earlier, oftentimes we aim for diversity, but not for the work that goes into it, and acknowledging every person that is present there. And I think there is that moment of recognition that you've been handed a lot of privilege just in being born white. And you can go from a point of being like, no, and in denial and thinking that it's not your fault. And while it isn't something that is a blame or a fault thing, it is definitely something that is still apparent and rests on a heart. But however, feeling guilty about something that you may not have chosen to be white does not fix the problem. And it's insulting to many people to sit on a place of defensiveness and that useless and helplessness instead of taking up prominence to stand and to work on it, and to aim to create a better system for people around you. So this summer, interacting with these conversations around race and culture, getting to meet a lot of people, getting to learn a lot of these terms, and seeing things that I'd seen in my society but not really understood the full context and breadth of it. It was a powerful experience, and an understanding that guilt does not do much. It's not a matter of feeling guilty about being another white female MTBC from the middle class, but what am I going to do with this point of privilege in learning and making sure that I'm creating the best point of care for my future clients and for my future coworkers. So, white guilt.
Yeah, and I experienced white guilt in a very different way from Grace. Being a Black woman and a Black student in a state where there's a very small, like under 4% Black population, and being at a school where a lot of students are coming from areas with an even smaller Black population, I started to experience this even more tenfold back in March, especially when we saw just nationwide response to the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. I had a lot of colleagues and co-students coming out of the woodwork to apologize for oppressing me in whatever way they felt they may have in some past grievance, and really putting the work on me to forgive them and also to educate them, which kind of ties into what Melita and Natasha and Marisol were talking about tokenization, because I was in a space, and weathering, I was in a space where I was the only Black person that a lot of my colleagues knew personally, and even some of my friends, where it went beyond feeling guilty and also went into that space of asking me to do the work for them when I was also doing my own work to become more actively anti-racist. And so we really kind of grappled with this, or I've been grappling with this a bit since even like March and before that, but we really grappled with this a lot too in our conversations this summer, and really kind of trying to disabuse people of the notion that they need to apologize for who they are, and really just recognize the place and of privilege that they hold and what that means to the spaces that they come into, without necessarily being apologists or being like overly cautious as they entered into those conversations. And similarly, in our conversations this summer, most of the students who came were white. So I was often the only person of color, not just the only Black student, but the only person of color in those spaces. So that kind of shifted even my role in those conversations without like letting people make me the authority in those conversations, because I was learning right alongside them, and without kind of placing me in this place where I was also doing the educating instead positioning myself and really kind of setting that ground rule or location kind of at the beginning of those conversations, that I wasn't there to teach, but to learn alongside them. And I, just because I was a Black student, while that did make me an expert in my own experience, it didn't make me an expert in anybody else's experience as a Black student or client or person of color in general.
I'm seeing the comments coming in from folks that I know are having to sort of transition out. We've got a couple more terms we want to cover. Cher Carroll is going to be coming up next to talk resistance, and then Hakeem is going to cover equity and justice, and Megan Masco and I will close us with discussion of liberation, and then we'll have some announcements from the faculty forum folks before we officially tighten up. So about 15 more minutes left here with us, but Cher Carroll,
All right. Hey, everyone. Wow, this is a lot. I feel like I need to take a few deep breaths because we're just like giving it to y'all. So, yeah, so here we go. So my head is exploding because there's a lot of things that I was going to go a different way with resistance. So I'm just gonna, y'all got to just go with me here. So I'll start off with some definitions. So Oxford Dictionary says the first two examples of definitions of resistance is one, the refusal to accept or comply with something, the attempt to prevent something by action or argument, and number two, the ability not to be affected by something, especially adversely, which in my mind equates with resilience. Okay, so I'm going to try to break down the ways I've encountered resistance in the profession, and since we're short on time, I'll just kind of highlight two scenarios for definition number one, which is the refusal to accept or comply with something, or the attempt to prevent something by action or argument. So when I first entered my graduate program, I was one of the only Black students enrolled, which, nod your head, Black folks, if you can relate to this on the panel. That's usually the case, where it's usually one of us or two. So my undergraduate degree was actually at an HBCU, which some of you may or may not know, because one of my professors didn't know what an HBCU was, which is a historically Black college or university. I think some people on the panel, raise your hand if you went to an HBCU, shout out, all right. Okay, and if you didn't know, now you know, but the establishment of the universities, of these universities, continue to contribute to the largest Black professional workforce still today. So when I experienced my very first class, I knew, I was like, oh, wow, because I came from a school where there were all Black people. There was a majority, I was the majority. And I noticed when I walked in, which a lot of Black people will notice, how people react to you when you're coming into a room as the only one or whatever. So I noticed that the students noticed, because when you're in the position of being the only one in the room, we learn to read cues. We read body language. We can see, we search the room for a connection to somebody, eye contact, or the avoidance of eye contact with you. So there's often a subtle resistance. Sometimes it's not subtle. Sometimes you can look in the room when you enter a space and see sort of like a disdain, like, wow, okay. So we know, because we are conditioned to study this phenomenon, right? We're conditioned, Melita talked about this earlier, like we scan a room, we're kind of like experts on white people in a way, because we know how to negotiate these spaces. So you kind of figure out where you belong. So there's resistance there. And then there's the resistance that I felt like, oh my gosh, do I belong here? Did I make a mistake by entering this program? How am I going to get through this? I hope this is just the first day. Maybe I'm not the only one in the program. But then, you know, I also didn't have the nerve to conjure up and ask my professors, like, am I the only one in this program, right? So there is the resistance there. I say that's one way. So I'll ask all of you professors to think about that when you encounter minority students come into your classroom and you know that they're the only one, right? How are you going to receive them? How are students going to receive them? So just ponder on that as a thought. And the biggest thing that came up, and it just came up in Adenike's poems twice, the way I experienced resistance was my music experience. This is huge. We've talked about it. We can't talk about it enough. The silencing of my Black expression through the very thing we were supposed to embody as music therapists, I did not feel like I had the option to really be open and share the music of my culture. To me, music in my world growing up is liberation. Music for Black people has been our liberation. It's been our resistance to the systems. It's been our way to get through all of the resistance we continue to face. Protest music, right? But I never felt liberation in my program because I didn't feel there was space for me to express that, not in any of the textbooks, not in the way ANTA defines music therapy. It was not what I thought this was. I was like, this is what music therapy is? when am I going to find it? In our Western pedagogy of white men composers that we have to embody in our theory classes, Schenkerian theorists out there who, I'm glad I dropped out that class because I was going to take that. It's awful. I'm glad I didn't have to go through that. In the music ensemble classes and our lab courses where I was like, I don't know if I can sit here and talk about, let's learn a Lauryn Hill song, right? Not in any of the piano, the pop music courses. So my refuge was to go after school and after class and play the music that liberated me. And I was in my program in 2008. I started it in 2002, but I kind of finished late because I had life happen and I came back to graduate school. Still today, so now fast forward, I am an internship supervisor and I'm pretty young in my, I guess, intern supervisor role. I've seen about 18 interns. And when talking about hip hop and learning progressions to soul music and R&B is the first thing that they do when they get with me. And it's like a foreign language. It's interesting. So I think y'all might get the picture there. So I found myself resistant to the curriculum and the education that I was receiving. And I still find myself resistant because that was my experience. So I've been trying to find a way to reconcile that resistance to something I love, because I do believe, I heard that music therapy can change people and heal people. So that has guided the way I practice, the way I have a highly music-centered approach, because it's always about the music. And I see the people I work with as having a music history and a culture that they're bringing with them. And I have to respect that first, wherever it's from, and not put my own experiences of my music culture and background to the space, but welcome theirs. So I just want to challenge our faculty here to think about this concept of receiving students, the music experience, how important that is. And then on the flip side, the second definition, right, was really about resilience. Oxford's number 2 was the ability to not be affected by something, especially adversity. So the way I was able to develop this kind of resistance and make it through my graduate program was, well, being Black, enough said. 2, my reliance on training at a HBCU, which is all about overcoming resilience and learning. I knew who I was. My history was so important. Black history was something was a requirement. It wasn't an option. And this number 3 is what I think is the most important for you all to take away, was what got me through my program was acknowledgement from one professor. When I was getting ready to do my research, I said, hey, I want to research and talk about Black folks and how I can connect with them. How do I connect with the people in my community using hip hop music? And again, this was back 2007. And one professor was like, that's not going to work because that's not my research focus. There's no literature out there for you. You probably should change your topic. And then I was like, I don't even know if I want to do this program. But this professor came in and said, you know what, Troy Carroll, I know you struggled through this program and I can help you. So I think it's important to understand that regardless if you see a student of color that comes to your program, that they need connection. Don't underestimate that importance. So I'll leave it at that because it's April. Oh, well, so where do we want to go from here, facilitators? Natasha.
We're all like furiously typing in the chat.
Oh, okay. I wasn't looking that way. I had to focus.
No, it's okay. You had to focus. And honestly, like the comments are like, preach, like we are hearing you and like valuing and needing your words. Absolutely. And I know that like Megan and I are nodding because we had a phone conversation earlier about liberation and what we would say in this space. And I'm keenly aware that we're like out of time for that. But you said things that Megan and I talked about and said things that I know a lot of us have thought about and that everybody in this space should be continuing to think about. But Hakeem, I'm gonna hand it to you, man.
Do you want me to talk about justice and equity, or do y'all want to go into a question?
How are we feeling, folks? I see.
We need to do questions. I'm afraid if we do much more, we've already been like drinking from a fire hydrant for a while.
Hey, that sounds good.
We might all explode, yeah.
So do we have any questions looking in the Q&A? If anybody wants to type a question, we'll take a couple of those or as many as we can get.
The way we talk, it'll probably be one.
Yeah.
Even if folks just want to chat like what they're feeling or thinking right now. Oh, we got something came in.
There's a question in the Q&A.
Do you want me to read it? I've got it pulled up. I can read it? Yeah, okay. So from Olivia Yinger, for those of you who do diversity, equity, and inclusion work at your colleges and universities, have you ever done something similar to Location of Self, discussing how our experiences, identities influenced our interest in DEI work within a department, college, or university DEI committee? Have you found it helpful? If you've done this, how have you approached it? Do you have any resources on how to start those conversations? That feels like a Hakita, or I just combined your names. I'm tired. Hakeem or Melita.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk first. I am leading several conversations. I think you said with our colleagues. I believe that was the context. So I am, I think for me, I'll give the specific context. I have a role at the university, but I also have a role in my conservatory, and I'm a social justice leader there. And so for me, I talked to the dean, and I was like, we have to have these conversations on company time. So every faculty meeting, they give me half of the faculty meeting to talk and to lead and to process. I've definitely curated some materials about storytelling and social justice on Perusall. I know some of you are familiar with Perusall, and people, they go through the material and they engage with the questions and things like that. So that's not a formal Location of Self, but those are ways in which we engage. And then now we can come to the conversation with them having done some pre-work. You know, one of the next steps that we have is to continue to do location of self for them, and we are also doing it. And I'm answering this in the ways that I've done it, but some people answer very formally. But also, you know, orienting them in the developmental model of intercultural sensitivity, talking about, you know, people being on a level of ethnocentrism. Many folks that are white liberals are in the minimization where they've learned how to be colorblind, been taught that that is the way to love people, but yet we need to reconcile that with the racial trauma and harm that is being caused by those same people. And so, and understand that it was built on a myth of a post-racial society. And so, you know, we do have these conversations. You know, there's this balance of, you know, me orienting them to things, but also a discovery process where they can engage. I think it's very important that they do their own work and that they engage in the materials as well. So that's some of the things that we're doing structurally and the process of it where I'm at.
The other half of Hakita. Our combined name. Similar, we do ours differently because we started just kind of in the beginning of the semester when we were doing retreats. So we do, my colleague and I, we split our 90-minute training that we do with everybody. And so the first half we do stereotypes. So I am, but I am not. And it's a great way for people to start talking about their different identities. So, and you do, anyway, it's good. And then we do the social justice ecosystem, and it comes along with questions that you answer. And so it helped us for finding a space that we were talking about centering equity and justice. And then like when we're doing it over Zoom, we all start saying ours out loud at the same time. So there is a space that you don't have to be on display, but we're answering, we're hearing, and then I play my music therapist. What do you hear? What do you see? What do you hear, right? But I think every space is going to be so different because every university is going to be so different. When I work across all of the art schools, some people have DEI committees. Some people are like, we have DEI issues, right? Like it's all over the place. So finding what works for your group and organization is a good kind of just exploratory place to be.
Can I just add one really quick? Also, Thandi D. Watts Jones is the person that created the location of self. And I placed her article inside the chat because she talks about how she's done it. I've seen it in a lot of different organizational contexts as well, but that's just one way it happens in the classroom, and it can be modeled in other spaces.
I just typed into the chat for the panelists, and I'm mindful of time too, that at Nike we had another poem to close, I think, yeah, was sort of where we were thinking we would go. And then Andrew, I know there are more announcements from the faculty forum to close us up, but just gratitude again for all of everything that's been shared tonight. Really honored to share this space with all of you.
Okay, I'd be happy to share one poem. One more, I should say. This one is a new one, if I can just find it. Hold on. It's funny kind of playing with buttons. Okay, so this one was thoughts that came to me for today. And it's from the perspective perhaps of a student, but also from someone who could be a colleague that you work with as well. What do you see when you look at me? Am I a problem to be solved with strategic plans and diversity initiatives? Is my presence here just a symbol of your progressive policies? Maybe you think that making me matter is the current wave to ride, that valuing who I am is a fad. Who I am is someone equally as passionate as you are about the power of music to change lives. Who I am is someone eager to learn, to grow, to be challenged. I don't come to you as an empty vessel to be filled. I come with a soul holding songs of joy and sorrow. I come with a heart holding hope for tomorrow. I come with a mind holding knowledge of vibrant cultures. I come ready to shine, but too often my light is dimmed because you don't know how to look at it. In a field that claims to give room to all voices, won't you make space for mine? In a field that claims to embrace all rhythms, won't you make space for mine? You've dedicated your life to supporting change in others. Isn't it time to create change in yours? I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm not asking you to be small. I am asking you to step up and make things better for us all.
Thank you again to our panelists and to all of you for joining us. A few final items just before we sign off. Please be sure to join us October 6th, the same time, the same place, and look for the link to join via email. That'll go out to music therapy educators as we continue these important discussions. First of all, linked in the chat, that'll be there in just a second, and in a follow-up email, we're adding a very short survey for you to take as an attendee. Please click on that link and help us inform future educator town halls. Remember to consider nominating someone or self-nominating for the steering committee, sending those in by October 15th, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. A big thank you from the rest of the steering committee to Andy Hunt, who was our liaison in this process of getting these two great online events happening. If you have any questions or comments about the faculty forum and specific to the steering committee, please email us at musictherapyfaculty@gmail.com. That's the same email address that we're sending out all of our information about town halls. And remember, you can rewatch this town hall or let a colleague know so they might also learn from this evening. That's it. Thank you and good night.